Hello everyone, welcome everyone to the channel Strange Night Podcast. Story 1, The Shoemaker's Curse. The story unfolds in New Haven, Connecticut, where old-growth trees cast deep shadows over century-old brick houses. Everyone knew of Mr. Edgar Thorne, a third-generation shoemaker. Edgar was a lean man with deep-set eyes under an old cap, always smelling of leather and glue. His workshop was hidden in an alley where the pale yellow light from his desk lamp was the only thing fighting back the night. Edgar lived by one principle: leather is eternal, art is frivolous. He lived with his 17-year-old son, Samuel. Samuel, unlike his father, was frail, always dreaming of vibrant colors and sweeping lines. He longed to be an artist, something Edgar considered a betrayal of their bloodline and sacred trade. Edgar constantly belittled Samuel, calling his drawings childish smudges and insisting he could never create anything of real worth. One chilly autumn afternoon, while tidying Samuel's workspace, Edgar found a thick envelope. Inside was an acceptance letter to the Rhode Island School of Design, RISD, and a bus ticket to New York, scheduled for Saturday dawn. Samuel had kept it all a secret. Edgar's veiny hands trembled, not just from anger, but from an ancient horror. The Thorne bloodline would be severed. The workshop would die. To Edgar, Samuel was not just a son, but a possession, a tool to maintain the family's legacy. During dinner, the atmosphere was thick. Edgar said nothing, just stared intensely at Samuel with a frigid gaze, as if looking at a traitor about to be executed. Samuel felt uneasy, but tried to act normal. That night, a storm descended. The rain poured down, and the wind howled through the cracks in the old window frame. Samuel had packed his backpack and was ready to quietly slip away at 3 a.m. At 2:45 a.m., as Samuel was trying to unlock the back door, a tall shadow stood behind him. "Where are you going, Samuel?" Edgar's voice was unnervingly calm, almost a whisper. Samuel turned around, his heart pounding. I was just going for a walk, Father." "You lie," Edgar said, stepping closer. "You are running away. You are throwing away everything we built. You are throwing away your father." Edgar didn't shout or strike him. He simply held out an object, a steel shoemaking awl. It was the tool Edgar always used to create perfect lace holes, a symbol of precision and craftsmanship. "Don't go, my son," Edgar whispered, his voice filled with both sorrow and malice. "You cannot live out there. That world will corrupt you. You must stay here with the leather. I will keep you here forever." And then, in a flash of thunder that tore through the sky, Edgar used the sharp awl, ending Samuel's laugh right there on the damp wooden floor of the workshop. The gruesome scene was quickly muffled by the howling wind and rain. Edgar buried his son hastily, silently, beneath the old leather storage cellar. After the murder, Edgar returned to his routine, but peace never came. A few days later, after Edgar finished a pair of high-end leather boots instead, there was something else. A single, unfinished shoe made from scraps of patched-up leather. It wasn't an ordinary shoe. It was a clumsy piece of art, perhaps what Samuel had been secretly trying to make. Inside the shoe, Edgar found a small piece of paper. It was written in Samuel's shaky handwriting. "Father, I can never wear my own shoes. I will stay here with you, and you will make that shoe for me forever." The tapping in the attic intensified, growing stronger, as if Samuel's soul was frantically trying to complete his shoes of freedom, forcing Edgar to live eternally with the terror of realizing the price of his possessiveness and betrayal, never to be forgiven. Story 2. The Shadow in the Oak House. The story takes us to the isolated Blackwood Acres farm in Iowa, set in the 1950s. It was a large, imposing yet gloomy oak house surrounded by endless cornfields. Arthur Sullivan, the owner of the farm, was an overbearing, dictatorial, and notoriously stingy man. His wife, Eleanor, was intelligent and sharp, having used her dowry to revitalize the farm after World War II. They lived in a marriage as cold as the house's name suggested. Everything fell apart when Eleanor, while tidying her husband's coat, found a handkerchief embroidered with the initials of another woman, the clearest evidence of Arthur's long-term affair. Worse, Eleanor also discovered Arthur had secretly mortgaged a large part of the farm's land due to failed investments and huge gambling debts. Eleanor confronted Arthur. She announced she would divorce him, expose all his sins to the law, and most importantly, she would claim her rightful share of the property, leaving Arthur penniless. Arthur could not accept this. To him, property was everything, and Eleanor was just an obstacle to be removed. He crafted a meticulous, cold-blooded plan. That evening, Arthur prepared dinner. He made Eleanor a cup of hot herbal tea she loved, but inside, he carefully dissolved a dose of extremely strong sleeping medication, the kind he usually used for sick livestock. He insisted Eleanor drink the entire cup. As Eleanor began to drift off, her eyes blurring, Arthur guided her to the base of the large oak staircase. He positioned her carefully, and with a decisive push, he sent her tumbling down the steps. Afterward, he called the police, his face filled with feigned distress, reporting that Eleanor had slipped and fallen due to an overdose of sleeping pills. The case was closed as an unfortunate accident. Arthur inherited the entire farm and felt he had won. The silence of the oak house now became terrifying. Initially, it was small details. Arthur always found teacups placed upside down on the kitchen counter, even though he was certain he had washed and put them away. Then the heavy oak doors often closed quietly on their own, making no sound right behind him. One morning, Arthur was shaving in the bathroom. He looked in the mirror and saw, just over his shoulder, a faint, blurry shadow standing in the corner of the room. It was Eleanor's shadow, but it didn't reflect light. It seemed to absorb it. Arthur whirled around, but the room was empty. From then on, that shadow never left the house. In daylight, he only saw a pale silhouette lingering at the edge of his vision. But as night fell, Eleanor's shadow became clearer. The most terrifying thing was the mirrors. Arthur could no longer look into any mirror in his house. Every time he glanced at his reflection, whether in the bathroom mirror or the wardrobe mirror, the mirror always showed Eleanor staring at him from behind, with hollow eyes and a faint smear of blood on her forehead, regardless of whether he was actually standing near the glass or not. The fear reached its peak every night. As Arthur drifted off to sleep, he always felt an invisible weight pressing down on his chest, growing heavier and heavier. It wasn't a nightmare. It was a real, physical sensation. He began waking up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, struggling to breathe. He was certain Eleanor was sitting on his chest. One night, Arthur woke up completely. He opened his eyes in the dark, feeling the crushing weight, unable to move. He tried to look down, and in the moonlight filtering through the window, he saw Eleanor's old wedding ring resting on his chest. right over his heart. The ring felt icy cold. He heard a whisper, Eleanor's cold sigh, right next to his ear. "You took my breath away, Arthur. Now I will take yours back, little by little." Arthur couldn't scream. The weight intensified. He lived every night in that torment, crushed by the soul of his murdered wife, slowly suffocated until dawn, when Eleanor's shadow would vanish, leaving him with utter terror and the frigid wedding ring on his chest. Story 3. The Elder Brother's Breath. The story takes place in a quiet, wealthy suburb of Boston, Massachusetts. Two brothers, Caleb and Jonah, grew up under the same roof but were constantly at odds. Caleb was the elder brother who achieved dazzling success, a graduate of a prestigious university, a solid career in finance, and the endless pride of his parents. Caleb was the embodiment of perfection. Conversely, Jonah was a man who always lived in his brother's shadow. He was a failure, no stable job, relying on handouts, and years of corrosive envy had eaten away at his soul. Jonah's resentment for Caleb had become a sickness. When their parents passed away just months apart, the will was revealed. The entire estate and a substantial trust fund were left to Caleb on the grounds that he was better suited to manage the wealth. Jonah received only a small sum. This decision was the final straw, pushing Jonah into a fit of madness. He believed his parents had never truly loved him, and Caleb had stolen the life he deserved. Jonah planned his revenge. He called Caleb, feigning reconciliation. He claimed he wanted to meet Caleb somewhere private to talk frankly about their brotherhood. Caleb, always trusting and pitying his younger brother, agreed. The meeting spot was a desolate grove of ancient maple trees, a forgotten place where the two brothers used to play as children. On a late autumn afternoon, Caleb arrived at the meeting point. He saw Jonah standing next to a roughly dug hole. Caleb was surprised. "What are you digging, Jonah?" Jonah did not reply, his eyes cold and vacant. Caleb began to feel fear, but it was too late. Jonah had a rope ready. He lunged, tackling Caleb to the ground. Caleb struggled, horrified to see the madness in his brother's eyes. "I am not the failure, Caleb," Jonah snarled, tightening the rope around his brother's neck. "You took everything from me. Now it all belongs to me. You don't deserve it." Caleb thrashed in vain, his breath choked off. Caleb's look of despair and shock was the last thing Jonah saw. When Caleb died, Jonah felt an overwhelming sense of release. He hastily buried Caleb beneath the root system of the ancient leafless maple tree, his perfect crime hidden by the night and the isolation of the woods. Jonah returned, played the role of the grieving younger brother, and reported Caleb missing mysteriously to the police. Jonah began to enjoy his new life with the immense fortune. He bought luxury cars and threw parties, but the joy never lasted. Everything he tried to enjoy fell apart. Major transactions failed at the last minute. Large investments suddenly vanished due to stupid, unexplainable errors. Then he started hearing whispers. Whenever he was alone, especially when sitting in Caleb's expensive leather chair, he heard a weak, familiar voice calling his name. "Jonah, Jonah." But the most terrifying thing was the sensation of breath. Jonah always felt a steady, icy gust of air on the back of his neck, even when he was in a sealed room with no draft. This sensation was always accompanied by an invisible presence right behind him. One night, Jonah was watching TV in the living room. He felt the cold breath and instantly spun around. No one was there, but the TV screen reflected an image that froze him solid. A fleeting, tall, blurry figure standing right behind his sofa. He jumped up, ran to the bedroom, and locked the door. He lay trembling in bed. He heard a very faint thump, thump, coming from under the bed, the sound of a heartbeat. Then he felt it again, clearly and frigidly, that steady, slow breath on the back of his neck, as if Caleb was lying pressed right up against him. "I'm always here, Jonah," the voice whispered right in his ear. "I'm always right behind you. Forever." Jonah realized he had not only stolen the fortune, he had stolen his own perpetual peace. Caleb's breath was a ghostly chain, forcing him to live in a hell where his dead brother remained an inescapable shadow, watching and sabotaging every moment he tried to enjoy his new life, founded on crime. Story 4. The Last Birthday Party. This story takes place in a luxurious and chillingly tidy house in Seattle, Washington. Audrey was a beautiful young woman, but her life was a continuous imprisonment by her own adoptive parents, Mr. and Mrs. Henderson. The Hendersons were wealthy, socially prominent people, but they controlled Audrey pathologically. They forbade her from socializing, censored every email and message, and forced her to be homeschooled with a rigorous curriculum they designed themselves. They believed the outside world would taint the perfect daughter they had created. To Audrey, the house was not a home, but a gilded cage. She had tried pleading, begging, and even rebelling, but every attempt was met with cold indifference and false moralizing. She knew that if she didn't act herself, she would be buried in this cage forever. Audrey's 21st birthday arrived. The Hendersons hosted an intimate party with just the three of them. No vibrant birthday cake, only the family's favorite dessert, homemade strawberry ice cream. While her parents were busy discussing future plans for her life, plans that never included her input, Audrey went into the kitchen. She had prepared a small vial containing a colorless, odorless poison, strong enough to end everything. With a hand that didn't tremble, she subtly sprinkled the powder into the strawberry ice cream, stirred gently, and placed the 3 bowls on the table. "Happy birthday, darling daughter," Mrs. Henderson said, giving a radiant smile, while Mr. Henderson looked at her with smug satisfaction. Audrey only smiled back, a smile she had never given them before, a smile filled with cold-hearted release. As the poison took effect, the Hendersons began to convulse, their faces contorted in agony. Audrey sat calmly in her chair, watching them. She felt no fear or remorse, only an extreme emptiness. Finally, they collapsed onto the luxurious dining room floor, their eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, where they had always promised her a perfect future. Audrey meticulously and calmly cleaned the scene. She faked a botched robbery, blaming it on homeless people breaking in. The police accepted the theory, as the house was so isolated. Audrey was declared the sole heir. Her life of freedom began. She applied to college, made friends, and did everything she had been forbidden to do. But that freedom came with an invisible chain: the scent. Soon after the crime, Audrey noticed something strange: the sweet, rich, yet utterly repulsive smell of strawberry ice cream seemed to cling to everything in the house. She cleaned thoroughly, repainted the walls, and replaced all the carpets, but the scent remained. It was overpowering in the room where she killed them. It permeated her clothes. She showered repeatedly, wore expensive perfumes, But when she went to school or out with friends, she always felt like others could smell that sickeningly sweet, slightly sour, and terrifying scent of strawberry. The odor was a constant reminder. And then there was the laughter. Whenever Audrey tried to enjoy a moment of her freedom, laughing with friends or being with a date, she always heard the faint, ghostly chuckle of her parents echoing from her memory. One night, she woke up from sleep because the smell of strawberry ice cream was overwhelming. She turned on the light and saw on her bedside table a full bowl of strawberry ice cream that no one had placed there. She frantically threw it away, but as she tried to sleep again, she heard Mr. Henderson whisper, his voice dripping with mockery. "You thought you escaped us, darling. Your freedom, it is so sweet, but it is also what will kill you. It is the most toxic thing. You can never wash away the scent of family." The smell of strawberry ice cream clung to her like a second skin. Audrey realized she had traded a physical cage for a perpetual mental one, where she would have to live forever with the scent and the mocking laughter of the very crime she created on her 21st birthday. Story 5. The Blood-Soaked Wedding Ring. The story takes us to New Orleans, Louisiana, a hot and humid place near the infamous swamps. Penelope was a charming, sharp woman married to Marcus, a wealthy but greedy and philandering businessman. Their marriage was a play of extravagance. Penelope believed she had secured financial safety until she discovered the horrific truth. Marcus was not only cheating with countless other women, but he had also secretly drained all her savings and trust funds, the money she inherited from her grandmother, to burn through gambling sessions at an underground casino on the outskirts. When Penelope confronted him, Marcus merely scoffed, declaring that her money was now his money and she could do nothing about it. That contempt ignited Penelope's cold hatred. She didn't want a divorce. She wanted revenge and wanted everything back without sharing with anyone. One dark and stifling night, Penelope waited for Marcus to return from a losing night of gambling. He stumbled into the living room, looking irritated and reeking of alcohol. He saw Penelope waiting, and he started mocking her again. "Who do you think you are, Penelope? You're just an expensive piece of jewelry. Money's only valuable in a man's hands," Marcus said contemptuously. In that moment, Penelope, with unexpected strength and resolve, grabbed the heavy crystal ashtray placed on the coffee table, an expensive wedding gift. She swung her arm, striking Marcus hard on the head. A loud smash echoed, and Marcus collapsed onto the floor, blood spreading on the expensive Persian rug. Penelope did not flinch. She had a plan. She dragged Marcus's body to the back of the house, which led directly to the nearby swamp area. She pushed his body into the dark, muddy water, believing that the alligators and the humid environment would erase all traces within a few days. The only thing she took was his gold wedding ring, fearing it might be discovered. She tossed it into a secluded corner of the house. Penelope reported her husband missing, playing the role of the grieving wife perfectly. She began to enjoy her freedom and control over the assets. But a few days later, as she was brewing her morning coffee, she saw something glittering on the kitchen counter. It was Marcus's wedding ring. It wasn't just there. It was covered in black mud and algae, carrying the stench of the swamp. Penelope panicked. She picked it up with a paper towel and threw it violently into the outdoor trash bin. The next day, she entered the bathroom. The ring was there again, right in the sink, beneath the dripping faucet. Again, the reek of swamp water and dampness. From then on, the wedding ring became an endless nightmare. It continuously appeared in places she couldn't have imagined, defying all her attempts to destroy it. In the pocket of the coat she was about to wear to a party, under the pillow she slept on. Most horrifyingly, peeking out from her coffee cup, the ring covered in mud. Each time the ring appeared, it brought with it the foul, damp stench of the swamp. Penelope couldn't escape it. One night, while frantically trying to smash the ring with a hammer, she heard a soft shuffle right behind her. It was a sound like Marcus trying to drag his mud-caked body across the floor. Penelope turned around, seeing nothing. She looked at the ring. The ring glistened under the lamp, but its surface reflected a blurry image. Not her face, but Marcus's face, sinking into the water, his eyes pleading and full of hatred. At the same time, she felt something cold and slimy touch her ankle. She screamed, jumping up. On the clean floor beneath her, there was a long, dark streak of dirty water, as if something had just crawled by. Marcus's voice resonated, hoarse and rusty, as if coming from the bottom of the muck. "You cannot escape our covenant, Penelope. This ring is yours. It is the proof of your greed. You can throw me away, but you cannot throw away my stain." The wedding ring, the symbol of love and commitment, was now a ghostly piece of evidence, forcing Penelope to live in ultimate fear, confronting the residue of her crime and the slimy, putrid breath of the swamp where she buried her husband every single day. Story 6. The Old Music Box. This story takes place in San Francisco, California. Grace, a middle-aged woman, was once a talented ballet dancer whose career was cut short by a severe injury. She lived with bitter resentment and deep regret over her lost glory. Grace projected all her unfulfilled ambitions onto her 16-year-old daughter, Elise. Elise was a timid girl who loved drawing, but was cruelly forced by her mother to pursue ballet. Grace believed Elise must be the perfect embodiment of what she failed to achieve. In the attic dance studio of their home, Grace turned every practice session into physical and mental torment. Elise always carried an old music box, a gift from her late father. Whenever she opened it, the soft, melodic ballet tune provided her with rare moments of peace, something Grace always despised as soft and sentimental. One sunny afternoon, Elise had a disastrous practice session. She failed to execute the 360-degree turn pirouette to Grace's satisfaction. "You're useless. You will never be a dancer with this superficiality," Grace screamed, her eyes blazing with frustration. Elise cried, pleading, "I don't want to dance anymore, Mom. I want to draw. Please leave me alone." This rejection pushed Grace past her breaking point. In a fit of pure rage, Grace shoved Elise, intending for her to redo the move. The push was so forceful that Elise lost her balance, flying toward the narrow wooden stair railing leading downstairs. A terrifying, dry snap echoed as Elise crashed violently into the railing and tumbled down the steps. She lay motionless at the bottom of the stairs, her neck broken. Grace stood at the top, looking down, her face pale with horror, not at the loss of her daughter, but at the realization that she had personally destroyed the masterpiece she was trying to create. Grace fabricated the accident, claiming Elise fell while practicing a turn. With no witnesses, the police closed the case as a tragic accident. After her daughter's death, Grace lived alone in the silent house. She believed she was finally free from the disappointment Elise represented. But a few nights later, as Grace was trying to sleep in the quiet room, she heard it. Music coming from Elise's empty bedroom. It was the tune from the old music box, the gentle, romantic ballet tune. But it sounded distorted, slower than usual, as if the music box was running out of battery. Grace searched Elise's room. The music box wasn't there. She checked every corner, but the sound persisted. From that night on, the ghostly music played every evening. Grace installed a lock on Elise's door, but even when locked, the music seeped through the wooden paneling. It seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Grace began to fear the dark. She kept all the lights in the house on. She tried wearing headphones to drown out the sound, but to no avail. The worst part was how the tune ended. Every time the slow, melodic tune reached its climax, it always finished with a powerful, dry snap, identical to the sound of Elise's spine breaking when she fell. After the snap, there was a chilling silence. One night, Grace ran up to the attic studio where she used to train Elise. The music was coming from there. She opened the door. The room was empty, but on the wooden floor where Elise usually stood, there was a faint, chalk-like silhouette, the shape of a young girl, dancing. And just then, the music reached its most distorted peak. Then the snap echoed right beneath Grace's feet, so forcefully that she felt the floorboards tremble. A small, pained voice resonated in the room. "You can kill me, Grace, but I will always dance for you. And every night, I will remind you of the final note." Grace realized she could not escape the tune. The old music box was her eternal cage. She was forced to live forever with the sound of her own pride and failure, repeating the horrifying moment of her crime until the end of her life. Story 7. The Fatal Kiss. Shanann Watts was an energetic woman, a blogger, and a devoted wife and mother. Her life revolved around Christopher, her mild-mannered husband who worked in the oil industry, and their two beautiful daughters, Celeste and Bella. Shanann frequently shared their happy moments on social media, creating an image of the perfect American family, admired by many. However, behind the radiant photos were cracks that ran deeper and deeper. Christopher began to grow distant. Shanann noticed the change, messaging friends about her distress that her husband no longer wanted to touch her. She was pregnant with their third child, a boy, but this only seemed to increase the pressure on Christopher, who had secretly started a romantic relationship with a co-worker. He yearned for a new life, unburdened by his wife and children. In the early morning hours of August 13, 2018, Shanann returned home from a business trip. Her final moments were captured by the security camera of the friend who dropped her off. It was the last time she was seen alive. In the quiet house in Frederick, Colorado, a fierce argument erupted between Shanann and Christopher. Shanann threatened divorce and stated he would never see his children again. That threat pushed Christopher past his breaking point. He murdered his pregnant wife by strangling her right there on their bed. Afterward, the two daughters, Bella, 4, and Celeste, 3, woke up. They asked, "What's wrong with Mommy?" Instead of protecting his children, Christopher loaded his wife's body into his truck, then coldly drove the two little girls to the remote oil field where he worked. At the oil field, Christopher ended the lives of his two tiny daughters. Bella pleaded, "Daddy, stop it." But he was relentlessly cruel. He disposed of Shanann's body in a shallow grave near an oil tank and pushed his two daughters through the small hatches of the crude oil storage tanks. Returning home, Christopher began his theatrical performance. He called the police, reporting his wife and children missing. When police and friends arrived, he played the distraught husband, cooperating fully with the search. He even appeared on local television, looking haggard, pleading for his family to just come home. "Shanann, Bella, Celeste, if you're out there, if you're seeing this, we miss you so much. Please come home." Christopher Watts's charade did not last long. Police and the FBI quickly noticed his conflicting statements and unusual demeanor. His extramarital affair was uncovered, and his mistress testified about Christopher's lies. Backed into a corner, Christopher Watts finally confessed, but his story was constantly changing. Initially, he blamed Shanann for killing the children, claiming he only killed her in a rage. Eventually, the horrific truth about the murder of the mother and 3 children was exposed. A calculated crime stemming from selfishness and a desperate desire for freedom. The episode concludes with Christopher being sentenced to multiple life terms. The final image is the stark contrast between the happy family photos on social media and the disturbing reality of a man who destroyed his family with coldness and cruelty, leaving a cautionary tale about the secrets hidden within domestic life. Story 8. The Basement Crypt. The Menendez family was the epitome of wealth in Beverly Hills, California. The father, Jose Menendez, was a powerful entertainment executive, and the mother, Mary Louise "Kitty" Menendez, was an elegant socialite. Their 2 sons, Lyle and Eric, grew up in luxury, attending prestigious private schools, but constantly enduring the strict control and pressure to succeed from their domineering father. On the night of August 20th, 1989, Jose and Kitty were shot to death in the living room of their opulent mansion. Moments later, Lyle and Eric frantically called the police, screaming that they had just returned home from seeing a movie and found their parents brutally murdered. "Someone killed my parents! Dear God, someone killed my parents!" The scene was poorly staged to look like a robbery gone wrong, but police quickly realized something was amiss. The doors were not forced open, there were no clear signs of a struggle, and the 2 shotguns used seemed to have been disposed of in haste. Immediately after the murders, while detectives were still investigating, Lyle and Eric began an astonishing spending spree. They quickly came into a large inheritance. The plot focuses on their insatiable list of purchases. Lyle bought a Porsche and invested in a taco restaurant. Eric hired an expensive tennis coach and started frequenting nightclubs. This behavior was entirely inconsistent with grieving sons. Furthermore, the brothers rented a separate apartment, hosted large parties, and showed almost no grief or remorse. This apathy was the first and largest clue that led to police suspicion. Psychological pressure gradually overwhelmed Eric, the younger brother. He began seeing a psychotherapist named Dr. L. Jerome Ozio. During therapy sessions, Eric confessed in detail about the plan and execution of the murders with his brother. When Dr. Ozio grew fearful and recounted the confession to his mistress, she subsequently contacted the police. Initially, the police could not use this information, as it violated doctor-patient privilege. However, Ozil's mistress later provided recordings of the conversation, despite much debate over their legality. The plot focuses on Eric's fear and torment, contrasted with the calculating coldness of Lyle, who constantly tried to control the narrative and force Eric to remain silent. When arrested and brought to trial, the Menendez brothers introduced a shocking defense. They claimed they killed their parents out of fear, following years of sexual and psychological abuse by Jose Menendez. They testified that Jose threatened to kill them if they ever revealed the secret. The episode concludes with an analysis of the case's duality. Was this a crime of greed and selfishness by 2 spoiled sons, or was it a desperate act of revenge by abused victims? The jury and the public were deeply divided. Ultimately, the brothers were sentenced to life imprisonment. The final image is of the opulent living room, the site of the most horrific crime, reminding the listener that money cannot conceal the rot within a family. Story 9. The Last Daughter. On the night of June 5, 2002, Elizabeth Smart, a 14-year-old girl living in Salt Lake City, Utah, was asleep in her room when an intruder broke in. He used a knife to threaten her and forced her to follow him. The abductor was Brian David Mitchell, a homeless man the Smart family had briefly hired for odd jobs, but whom they had fired due to his erratic behavior. The only witness to the abduction was Elizabeth's 9-year-old sister, Mary Catherine Smart, who pretended to be asleep to avoid detection. She remained silent due to fear, but it was she who later provided the crucial clue about the kidnapper. The plot focuses on Elizabeth's terror as she was led out of her comfortable home, forced to walk for miles into the desolate mountains behind her house, where Mitchell and his wife, Wanda Barzee, had set up a makeshift camp. Immediately after abducting Elizabeth, Mitchell declared himself a prophet sent by God. He forced Elizabeth to wear a veil, don robes, and call him Emmanuel. He performed a bizarre ceremony, declaring Elizabeth his second wife, turning her into his sexual and religious slave. The plot details Mitchell's brutal psychological manipulation. He used scripture and his delusional teachings to convince Elizabeth that she would be killed if she tried to escape or reveal her true identity. This is the most harrowing part, where the perpetrator uses faith as a tool to destroy the spirit of an adolescent victim. For 9 months, Elizabeth was held captive. She was even forced to move multiple times, occasionally begging for money in the middle of Salt Lake City, veiled and standing right next to the people who had posted her missing person flyers everywhere. Despite being questioned by police early on, Wanda Barzee and Mitchell skillfully denied any wrongdoing. They were eccentric vagrants, and the police failed to find any physical evidence at their camp. The biggest breakthrough came from the memory of Mary Catherine Smart. After months of silence, fueled by fear, the young girl bravely told her parents that she believed the kidnapper was the family's former handyman. Her testimony helped create an accurate sketch of Mitchell. The search shifted to a national scale. In March 2003, just 9 months after the abduction, Mitchell, Barzee, and Elizabeth, who was completely disguised by this point, were spotted walking on a busy street in a Salt Lake City suburb. Police recognized Elizabeth based on the new descriptions of her clothing and features. When questioned, it took Elizabeth a moment to confirm her identity, a result of Mitchell's prolonged psychological manipulation. The episode concludes with Elizabeth Smart's return home and Mitchell's arrest. This installment is not just a story of a horrific crime, but also a stark warning about how evil can hide behind an eccentric facade, exploiting public indifference to inflict the most savage acts upon the innocent. Mitchell was sentenced to life imprisonment. Story 10. The Twins' Curse. June and Joyce were born minutes apart, yet fate seemed to have destined them as lifelong rivals. June was always the standout, prettier, better grades, and consistently favored by their parents in social activities. Joyce, conversely, often lived in her sister's shadow, feeling like a dull copy, harboring deep-seated envy. As they grew older, the distinction became starker. June was successful in her career, married a wealthy man, and moved into a luxurious seaside home in Florida. Joyce, less fortunate, struggled with work and relationships, living in a meager rented apartment. Despite the distance, the thread of jealousy never broke. Every family gathering or phone call became a subtle battlefield where June flaunted her success and Joyce silently stewed in resentment. The situation climaxed when June asked Joyce to be her maid of honor at her extravagant wedding. Throughout the event, Joyce felt overshadowed and treated more like a servant than a loved one. She believed June intentionally humiliated her in front of the guests. After the wedding, Joyce became obsessed. She started following June, convinced she was entitled to what June possessed. Envy mutated into a ferocious rage, fueled by a lifelong sense of injustice. Joyce planned one final confrontation. Joyce drove to June's house, carrying a sharp object, e.g., a kitchen knife or a garden trowel. She found June relaxing alone on her seaside deck. A heated argument erupted. Joyce unleashed all her years of hurt and feeling betrayed. June, accustomed to dominance, scoffed at Joyce, calling her a failure and unworthy. Those words were the final catalyst. In a fit of madness, Joyce used the weapon to murder June. The plot describes the violent act as definitive and cold-blooded. After committing the crime, Joyce staged the scene to look like a robbery homicide, taking some jewelry and attempting to dispose of the weapon. When police arrived at the scene, Joyce was among the first to show up, crying hysterically, playing the role of the distraught sister. However, investigators quickly grew suspicious of Joyce's intense focus on the crime details and the inconsistency of her statements. The key was the toxic twin relationship they shared. Detectives interviewed friends and relatives about the long-standing jealousy between the two. A physical clue, such as a strand of hair or a small blood trace, eventually linked Joyce to the scene. The episode concludes with the final interrogation, where Joyce breaks down and confesses her true motive: not money or assets, but the desire to escape her sister's shadow and end the pain of comparison. The final image is the terrifying contrast between two identical faces, one in the grave and the other facing life in prison, proving that envy can become a deadly curse on blood ties. Story 11. The Deadly Pact. Morgan Geyser and Anissa Wire, both 12 years old in Waukesha, Wisconsin, were close friends. They shared a common fascination with online horror stories, particularly the urban legend of Slender Man, a tall, thin, faceless entity known for abducting children. This interest quickly turned into a pathological obsession. Morgan, who was later diagnosed with schizophrenia, firmly believed in Slender Man's existence. Anissa also believed that becoming his proxies was necessary to protect their families from his wrath. The two forged a deadly pact. They had to kill someone to prove their loyalty and be accepted into the Slender Man Mansion in the Nicollet National Forest. They chose their classmate, Peyton Leutner, pseudonymously referred to as Bella in some accounts, as their sacrifice. On the night before Morgan's birthday, Peyton was invited to a sleepover. The plot focuses on the contrast between the innocent, cheerful atmosphere of a typical teenage sleepover and the murderous plan brewing in Morgan and Anissa's minds. The next morning, May 31st, 2014, the two girls lured Peyton into a nearby patch of woods under the guise of playing hide-and-seek. Initially, they intended to carry out the attack in a park bathroom, but they lost their nerve. Eventually, they led Peyton deeper into the secluded forest. In the woods, Morgan and Anissa told Peyton to lie down. Morgan then took out the prepared kitchen knife and stabbed Peyton 19 times in her arms, legs, and torso. Anissa stood by, urging Morgan on. Desperate and in agony, Peyton pleaded for them to stop. Instead of helping, the assailants told Peyton that she would bleed out faster if she tried to crawl for help. They then abandoned Peyton, leaving her lying in a pool of blood. Believing she was dead, and that they had completed their mission for Slender Man. This section is a harrowing depiction of the perpetrator's complete detachment from reality, having been entirely consumed by a fictional character. Severely wounded, Peyton Leutner mustered the strength to crawl out of the woods to a nearby road, where a passing bicyclist found her and called for emergency services. Despite her grave injuries, Peyton miraculously survived after a 6-hour surgery. Police found Morgan and Anissa walking along the highway, en route to the Nicollet National Forest to find Slender Man's mansion. When apprehended, they confessed to the crime plainly and emotionlessly, explaining that they had to kill their friend to prove themselves worthy to Slender Man. The episode concludes with the sentencing of Morgan and Anissa. Both were tried in adult court and later committed to psychiatric treatment, and Peyton's courageous recovery. It's a tragic story of how online delusions can have deadly, real-world consequences, and the destruction of a friendship caused by a fictional nightmare. Story 12. The Silent Hunter. Dennis Rader lived in Wichita, Kansas. He was a husband to Paula, a father of 2 children, a devout member of the Lutheran Church, and even a Cub Scout leader. Importantly, he worked for the local government, initially in security and compliance. He was known as serious, meticulous, and sometimes a difficult neighbor, but never suspected of being a murderer. However, starting in 1974, he terrorized Wichita with a series of mysterious murders. He would break into homes, systematically tie up, torture, and kill his victims, often women and children. He was BTK, the moniker bind, torture, kill. He gave himself and sent to the media. The plot focuses on the chilling contrast, photos of the Rader family attending church and camping while he was planning his next crime or exchanging pleasantries with neighbors he was about to target. After murdering 10 people, BTK abruptly went silent in 1991. He vanished from public life and continued to live a completely normal existence for over a decade. This silence only made the BTK legend more terrifying in the minds of Kansas residents. Then, in 2004, BTK decided to break his silence. He began sending packages containing evidence, photos of victims, and mocking taunts to the police. His arrogance is the focal point of this section, illustrating his desperate need for recognition and his desire to reconnect with the public and authorities. His game became dangerous when he sent a floppy disk to a local television station. In the accompanying letter, he asked the police if he could communicate with them via the floppy disk without being traced. The police publicly replied via the press, "Yes, it is safe." This was BTK's fatal error. The police computer experts traced the metadata on the floppy disk. They discovered the disk had last been used by a person named Dennis at the Christ Lutheran Church, where Rader was an active member and held a significant role. Police focused their investigation on Dennis Rader. They secretly obtained a DNA sample from a stain, semen, left on his daughter's car while she was away at college. This DNA sample was a match for the DNA BTK left at one of the old crime scenes. In February 2005, Dennis Rader was arrested at his workplace. The entire nation was horrified. The most notorious serial killer in Kansas history was the neighbor, co-worker, and community leader they thought they knew. At his trial, Rader confessed to his crimes in a cold, emotionless manner. He described each murder in the detached tone of someone reading a technical report. He showed no remorse. The episode concludes with the image of Dennis Rader, the cold-blooded killer sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms, locked away forever. The haunting conclusion. We have witnessed 6 stories of betrayal and violence within family and friendship. But the final lesson Dennis Rader teaches us is this: the monster doesn't live in the shadows. He lives next door. He is the perfect husband, the devoted father, the friendly neighbor, until he decides you are his next prey.